leading the revolution of talk radio. Doug Hurd on AM News Talk 1360.
Those of you who have listened to this show for any period of time know that I have had an incredible interest in the assassination of President Kennedy. We've done numerous shows on it down through the years. Of course, Cyril Wecht is a good friend, has been aboard with us many times. For years and years and years, I said there had to be more than one gunman. I would be lying if I said I read every page of Mr. Vincent Bugliosi's Reclaiming History, the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. Vincent Bugliosi, author of Helter Skelter, book published by Norton. But I have read about 900 pages worth of this massive tome. It is an incredible piece of work, folks. I am not kidding when I say this. And talking to my buddy Mike in Fort Lauderdale, who was obsessed with the assassination, I said, Michael, I can't believe for all these years we thought more than one guy did it. It's Oswald, and it was Oswald alone. And Mr. Bugliosi has convinced me of that very point. Vincent Bugliosi, the guest on AM News Talk 1360. First of all, sir, congratulations on an excellent book. Although why somebody hired Josiah Thompson to review it is beyond me.
Well, I didn't know that Josiah Thompson was reviewing it.
He reviewed it. We had it in yesterday's Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, but it wasn't a local review. It came from some chain somewhere. But just about all the reviews have been excellent. But I want to go to the current and then kind of work my way back, if you don't mind.
But before you go any further,
Sure.
I want to thank you for having me on the show, Doug. I've been on your show before.
Yes, you have.
And I appreciate it. Okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead. My voice is a little hoarse. I got a slight touch of laryngitis. All right. I won't interrupt you again. Go ahead.
But you got to answer me a question, though. While doing the radio show, I saw you on Hardball. Who was that guy? Who was that guy?
It's just unbelievable. I mean, he's claiming that RFK conducted his own investigation of the case, which makes no sense whatsoever. RFK was the chief law enforcement officer in the entire country, has the FBI underneath him, U.S. attorneys all over the country, and if he thought that the mob or CIA murdered his brother, obviously he's going to use his vast resources to get to the bottom of it. He's not going to start traveling around the country by himself investigating the case. It's silly.
I could not believe that they would even put that guy on. All right, let me take three pieces of current stuff, starting with E. Howard Hunt's son. Rolling Stone did this huge piece. He, by the way, is William F. Buckley Jr.'s godson, E. Howard Hunt's son. We've got the Rolling Stone piece, Deathbed Confession, a la Bill Casey. We have this new film, which Posner seems to think merely adds that there was indeed one gunman, and then something about test-raising questions about lone JFK gunman. I'll let you take them one at a time, starting with the Hunt business.
Well, the Hunt case, it's just a fairy tale story of E. Howard Hunt's two sons, and it's totally consistent with a long list of similar stories about people who try to make a fast buck off a family member, Doug, who has died, by coming up with a bogus story. Hunt's sons, one's an ex-con, the other is a jacuzzi salesman, have come up with a phony story that their father himself says, by implication, is untrue, because in his memoirs just before he died in 2007, Helms nowhere says there was a conspiracy in the assassination. He says he doesn't know, but there were people that had a motive. Well, motive doesn't mean anything. It only takes you so far. Yet the sons now say he told them that LBJ and the CIA were behind Kennedy's murder. That's just nonsense. Hunt's daughter, by the way, and the sister of these two men, is just appalled by what the two brothers are doing. Hunt's widow is appalled. The personal lawyer is appalled. It's just nonsense. I'm getting a lot of not a lot of, I don't know what you'd call it, echo or whatever it is, but it's if he can do something to the sound.
All right.
Anyway, it's just pure nonsense. It's the type of story that's going to continue to come out for 500 years. It's nonsense.
Okay, is this any better, Mr. Bugliosi?
Yeah, it's a lot better.
Okay. Now, what about this business with the ammunition? Test raises questions about lone JFK gunman. Texas A&M research on bullets finds evidence of a single shooter, not a slam dunk.
Okay, I'll tell you how new that is, okay? It's so new that it's already in my book, okay? It's in an endnote section. It's an old story, and they're just regurgitating again. This is what I've been dealing with. This is why this book took 20 years to write, because there's these constant stories coming out, and they're all nonsense. And I'm so happy that in your reading the book, you're coming to the same conclusion that I am, that Oswald killed Kennedy and acted alone. Well, there's really no doubt about it. And you know, Doug, it's difficult. I'm still getting echoes now. Doug, are you there?
Yes, I'm listening.
It's difficult for me to speak candidly about reclaiming history without being boastful. And, you know, I've had 3 other books, number 1 on the New York Times bestseller list, Outrage, The 5 Reasons Why Simpson Got Away with Murder, and Helter Skelter, and Anna C. Will Tell. And I never boasted about the books. But here's the problem I have with reclaiming history. if I don't speak candidly and therefore be boastful, people could think it's just one of another of the close to 1,000 books on the assassination. And Doug, as you know, you looked at it, it definitely is not. As the LA Times said, finally someone has put all the pieces together in the Kennedy assassination. Reclaiming History is a book for the ages. The Wall Street Journal said Reclaiming History is unlike any other book ever written on the assassination. Now, this sounds boastful, but you see, if I don't talk this way about this book, and there's been 1,000 other books out there, one could think it's just another of the 1,000 Kennedy books out there, and it's not. And I'm so glad that you agree.
All right, now, if we have any more echo, you let me know. We'll call you back and try again. I want to talk about, let's go back to Ruby. People think that Ruby wasn't some kind of a hoots with this, that, or the other thing. As you point out in the book, Ruby got there, just happened to get there at the right time. And what has always hit me, and I think it did you too, this guy owned a dog. And in order to understand Ruby, you have to understand dog lovers. Would you mind elaborating on that?
Well, there's definitely an echo here.
I tell you what, we'll call you back. We'll call you right back.
Okay.
You have his number? We're going to call you right back. I don't know what's going on here. Do you have an echo in your room? I haven't got an echo in mine. It's 11 minutes after 4 o'clock on AM News Talk 1360. Again, Wednesday, Bernard Goldberg. Thursday, be at the, Expo Mart. I've got everything turned down in here, Greg, so I have no idea whatsoever why there would be an echo. The other thing, by the way, the group show on Friday, we have an open chair. An open chair for the Doug and the Group thing. So if you're interested in being on our Friday Doug and the Group extravaganza, please call the 412-333-1360 telephone number. I'll give your name and nighttime telephone number to Greg so we can move ahead with that. All right, talk to me about Sheba, Ruby the dog lover, and the timing that got him there at just the right time.
Well, about the timing, as you know, he was sending a Western Union telegram of over $20 to one of his strippers at the club. And there was someone standing in front of him, and Ruby was not in any rush whatsoever. He obviously, if he was planning to kill Oswald, as he ended up doing, if it was something that he thought about in advance, he wouldn't be sending a telegram of money to someone within a couple minutes of Oswald coming down the elevator and about to be transferred over to the Dallas Sheriff's Office. Obviously, he'd be waiting for Oswald. So he takes his time, but he just gets over there to the police department. He sees a large crowd of people. He walks down the Main Street ramp, and as he does, he sees Oswald. He's got this enormous animus towards Oswald. See, we're jumping ahead of the story here. Ruby loved Kennedy. He idolized him. He thought he was the greatest man who ever lived, and he obviously hated Oswald for killing Kennedy. His sister Eva used to live in Los Angeles, Doug, and I used to talk to her from time to time. She's passed away, and she said that when Kennedy died, my brother Jack cried harder than when Ma and Pa died. So what I'm saying here is that obviously he had this tremendous hatred for Oswald, but if he had premeditated this murder, he wouldn't be at the Western Union sending out a telegram of money. He would have been waiting in the police basement for Oswald. As it happens, he got there within a split second of Oswald getting there. If he had been a second or two later, Oswald would have been in the car and being transported to the Dallas Sheriff's Office.
And was not Oswald's transference delayed as it was, sir?
Yeah, as it was delayed, and Ruby wouldn't have had any way of knowing that, so it was delayed. So that fact alone shows that he did not silence Oswald for the mob. But there's so many other things to talk about when we talk about Jack Ruby. Ruby was very, very close to the Dallas law enforcement, loved the police. They were very close to him. Over half the force knew him. He was a snitch. If anything happening at his girly club, the Carousel, indicated to him that maybe a crime was being committed, he'd call the Dallas Police Department. So obviously he's not the type of guy that the mob would ever rely upon, someone who was a snitch and very close to the Dallas Police Department. He also was very, very unbalanced, no question about that. He had a violent temper. He was always knocking customers down. He'd get in fights with them, throw them down the stairs. And I told you, he's got these these dogs that you talked about, he had 7 of them. 6 of them he called his children, the 7th, Sheba, his wife. And he would not have left that dog behind if he thought that when he went down into that basement that he was not going to be coming back.
And my point, Mr. Bugliosi, is you have to be a dog lover to understand that, okay? For people who are dog lovers, no way do you believe your beloved animal in the back of your Cadillac if you're you're going to kill somebody intentionally.
Right. But, when you say that Ruby silenced Oswald for the mob, that presupposes that Oswald killed Kennedy for the mob. If he hadn't, what would there be to silence? And the FBI and the Warren Commission looked into Ruby's background extensively and found no connection that he ever had with organized crime. Now, he did have this girly club, and undoubtedly he came into contact with some low-level mobsters at the club, but no more than would be expected for someone in his position. I should add that he used to like to intimate that he had mob connections. He was always putting on a facade, but it was nothing more than that. He offered to take a polygraph test on this issue. Polygraph tests are not conclusive. However, what is very strong circumstantial evidence is that he offered to take the test, and he passed it on the issue of whether he was connected with organized crime and killed Oswald for the mob. But there's no... we should talk about this whole thing of conspiracy. If you talk about one issue here, let's say organized crime, then someone say, well, what about CIA? And you talk about CIA, well, what about the FBI? Let me say this. If I can try to consolidate all of these conspiracy theories into a minute and a half or two, if you give me that time, Doug.
Sure.
There's no credible, and let's underline the word credible, there's no credible evidence that organized crime, the CIA, military-industrial complex, or any other group was behind the assassination. All there is naked speculation. I quote prosecuted Oswald, as you probably know, Doug, in London in 1986. Jerry Spence defended him, as you know, and we had a regular Dallas jury. We worked on the case for 5 months. We treated it like a real trial. There was no script. Time magazine said it was the closest to a real trial that the Kennedy assassination or that Oswald would probably ever have. The jury convicted him. And I told the jury in London, I said, folks, 3 people can keep a secret, but only if 2 are dead. And here we have close to 44 years later, Doug, and not one word, not one syllable has leaked out that any of these groups were connected with the assassination. Just the naked allegation and the allegation of motive, which does not take you very far at all. Number 2.
Let me just jump in, sir, and you can elaborate on this. Just the common sense of the matter of CIA, FBI, these guys, you would have to have conspiracies so large that somebody would have opened their mouth. Yeah.
Of course. Number 2, there's no evidence that Oswald was ever connected to any of these groups believed to be behind the assassination. And believe me, Doug, they checked every breath this guy ever breathed from the moment he arrived back in the United States from the Soviet Union on June 13th, 1962, to the day of the assassination. They conducted 25,000 interviews, and they found no evidence that he was ever associated with any of these people. Number 3, if one of these groups did decide to kill Kennedy, and I reject that out of hand. It's the type of thing you'd find in a Robert Ludlum novel, but as you know, Doug, in the book, I don't reject it out of hand. I go into extreme depth. In fact, this is the first book on the assassination that goes into all the conspiracy theories and demolishes every one of them. But I'm telling you that I didn't have that luxury in the book, but between you and me, the CIA or the mob sitting down and saying, let's murder the President of the United States belongs in a novel. But let's assume, for the sake of argument, that they decided to kill Kennedy. Oswald would have been one of the last people on the face of the earth whom they would have gone to. Why? Well, number 1, he was not an expert shot. He was a good shot, but not an expert shot. He had a $12 mail-order rifle. He was notoriously unreliable, extremely unstable. Here's a guy, Doug, as you know, you read the book, defects to the Soviet Union pre-Gorbachev. I mean, even today, who in the world defects to the Soviet Union? He gets over there, wants to become a Soviet citizen. They turn him down. What does he do? He tries to commit suicide. He slashes his wrist. I mean, just the type of guy that the CIA, I'm being sarcastic now, or mob would want to rely upon to commit the biggest murder in American history. Let's take it one step further. Let me take it one step further. Assuming for the sake of argument that they decided to kill Kennedy, and for whatever crazy, bizarre reason, they decided to use Oswald as a hitman. Doug, let's see if where that takes us makes any sense. Once Oswald left the book depository building after shooting Kennedy in Dealey Plaza, one of 2 things would have happened. Let me tell you the least likely thing first. The least likely thing is that there would have been a car waiting for him to help him escape down to Mexico or wherever. Certainly the conspirators would not want their hitman to be apprehended and interrogated by the authorities. But the most likely thing by far, Doug, and I'm sure you already know what I'm going to say before I say it, the most likely thing by far that would have happened if the mob or CIA had Oswald kill Kennedy for them, there would have been a car waiting for him to drive him to his death. You know that would have happened. You know that would have happened. Instead, Oswald is out on the street with $13 in his pockets trying to flag down buses and cabs. I mean, that fact alone, Doug, tells you all by itself that there was no conspiracy here. Even the presidential motorcade that took the limousine right beneath Oswald's window, Doug, that wasn't even determined until November 18th, 4 days before the assassination. Does anyone really believe that some group would conspire with Oswald to kill Kennedy within just 4 days of the assassination? No. It's all moonshine.
Now, a lot of people say that it was changed at the last minute so that Oswald could. Obviously, there's no evidence to suggest that.
No evidence of that. Just a naked speculation. No evidence at all.
We're talking to Vincent Bugliosi on AM News Talk 1360. The book is Reclaiming History, the Assassination of President John F. Kennedy. How much does this book weigh? It's got to be 7 or 8 pounds.
Well, you know, the funny thing, when I finished the book, is I've been working on it for over 20 years. It's my magnum opus, and someone said, well, Vince, you know, you've had your baby, and it turns out it weighs 7 pounds, which is about the weight of a baby. But you know, I'm really, it's really heartening to me that people like yourself, you were you believed in a conspiracy, but you're a reasonable person. I know that I'm not going to convince the people on the jagged margins of the conspiracy community, those that go to conventions and subscribe to newsletters, and it's a huge part of their life.
And by the way, Mr. Bugliosi, I've interviewed these guys. Once you disagree with these guys, you become a part of the conspiracy.
Oh, of course, yeah. There's already allegations out there that maybe I'm connected with the CIA and all that stuff. But you're a reasonable person, and my belief has always been that reasonable people are going to be persuaded that Oswald acted alone. The LA Times Review said, with Reclaiming History, from this point forward, no reasonable, let's italicize the word reasonable, no reasonable person can argue that Lee Harvey Oswald was innocent. No sane person can take seriously assertions that Kennedy was killed by the CIA, Castro, the mob, the Soviets. Reclaiming History may finally move those accusations beyond civilized debate. So it's really encouraging when I hear someone of your stature and intelligence, who at one time believed in a conspiracy, reads Reclaiming History and sees that you are wrong. There are many people in the audience listening right now that are convinced that you and I are wrong. And I tell them that if they read the book, they're going to see that they're wrong, and they're going to have to go into another room. They're going to be so embarrassed, they're not going to want to show their embarrassment.
Well, let me tell you a couple of quick points here. The 4 days in November, which takes up the first 300 pages of the book, I'm 60 years old, so needless to say, it brought back a hell of a lot of memories. Point number 2, the biographical portion where you talk about Oswald, going to heavy-duty Oswald and heavy-duty on Ruby. These are obviously two guys that are capable of doing what they did. But I want to go to Oliver Stone and the resurrection of the discredited Jim Garrison. You excoriate Stone in this book. You excoriate Mark Lane. Thank God somebody's finally gotten around to it. But when I never could quite figure out with this guy Garrison, of all the people to accuse, why Clay Shaw?
Why Clay Shaw? Because there was this lawyer, Dean Andrews, who lied and admitted that he lied in front of the Warren Commission. That a guy by the name of Clay Bertrand had come to him. He couldn't find him. He had no record of him. He couldn't locate him anywhere. But that Clay Bertrand used to be a client of his. And that after the assassination, Clay Bertrand called him and wanted him to represent Oswald in Dallas. And Garrison found out about this. And the description of Clay Shaw, or Clay Bertrand, was that he was a homosexual. And there was this Clay Shaw in New Orleans, very well-known man, head of the International Trademark, and he was also a homosexual. And when Garrison heard that set him off, and he was convinced that Clay Bertrand, who never existed, and Dean Andrews admitted it was a fictitious name, when he connected Clay Bertrand with Clay Shaw, he went off on Clay Shaw. And incidentally, you know, they say that Oswald was a patsy. Clay Shaw was the real patsy here, because I'm personally convinced that Jim Garrison used Clay Shaw as a vehicle, as a patsy, to attack the Warren Commission. Let me just give you one piece of circumstantial evidence. When you're a prosecutor and you believe the guy that you're prosecuting is guilty, when you get up in your summation, you say to the jury that this guy is guilty, and here's the evidence showing he's guilty. In Garrison's summation to the jury, he only mentioned Clay Shaw's name once, and he told the jury, you're here to determine whether Shaw is guilty or not guilty. Well, they already knew why they were there, to determine that. But he never said he was guilty, never spoke about any of the pieces of evidence pointing towards his guilt. So Clay Shaw's the patsy, not Lee Harvey Oswald.
You use the term patsy and Oswald, I'm just a patsy, and you add some context to that. Would you mind doing that for the audience?
Yeah, conspiracy theorists throughout the years have said that when Oswald said, I'm just a patsy, what he was really saying, they said by definition, that there were high-level conspiratorial groups behind him, like the mob or the CIA or the military complex, and that's what Oswald was saying. But when you look at the context of when he said that, they asked him if he shot the president. He said, no, they're just charging me with the president's murder because I defected to the Soviet Union. So he's not talking about some high-level conspiratorial group. He's talking about Dallas law enforcement, saying they're charging him with the murder just to get even with him for defecting to the Soviet Union.
Was there any evidence, and some of the questions I'm doing rhetorically, because as I said, I've read a good 800 to 900 pages of the book. I haven't even gotten around to the CD-ROM. By the way, the CD-ROM is where the Dictabelt business is?
Yeah.
You got to explain that to the folks.
I demolished the House Select Committee's thing, and it's about 55, 60 pages there. Do not ignore the CD-ROM. It's another 1,125 pages, and many, many important things are in there because I had to cut down on the size of the book. And also, I didn't want to interrupt the flow of the narrative, but a great number of important things are in the CD-ROM.
Including this Dictabelt thing, which came via the House Assassinations Committee.
Right.
Okay, and that I'll let the audience read the book on that. There was also some controversy surrounding the disappearance of JFK's brain. Dr. Wecht has made a big deal out of that down through the years. And yet when I've had him on the show, I said, "Oh, come on, Cyril. Bobby Kennedy didn't want somebody looking at this man's brain 50 years from now. He probably had it destroyed or possibly put in the casket."
Yeah, well, the brain has disappeared, but what people forget and are apparently unknowledgeable about, the brain was present. Some people say it wasn't, but the brain was present at the time of the autopsy. It was weighed, it was photographed, and it existed for a couple years. It was in the White House basement, and finally it was brought over to the National Archives, where RFK's secretary had custody of it, along with other assassination-related materials. And then finally in 1967 there was an inventory, and lo and behold, the brain was missing. The House Select Committee conducted a very extensive examination of this whole issue, interviewed over 30 people, and came to the conclusion that it was RFK who had seized the brain because he was fearful that it might one day appear in some grotesque way in a film, or someone taking it around the country, charging people $1,000 to see it, or what have you. They didn't use those words, but they came to the conclusion that it was RFK who disposed of his brother's brain. But that brain was not necessary to preserve. I mean, it would have been better if it had been preserved, but it was present at the time of the autopsy. It was examined. It was weighed. It was photographed. So this happened a couple years later when it disappeared.
We have to take a break, but before we do, I can remember conspiracy theorists for years, Alan J. Weberman, one of America's greats, I said that quite facetiously, about the three tramps, and lo and behold, it turned out the three tramps were three tramps.
That's all they were, three tramps, of course. Yeah. But it's not going to end. It's not going to end. Doug, as I'm talking to you right now, there's at least 100 people in this country who are consecrating their whole life to this case, looking at some document from the National Archives for some contradiction, some inconsistency, some discrepancy, some little hint of a conspiracy. And when you get intelligent people getting together like this, now they're certifiably psychotic when it comes to this case, but they're otherwise intelligent. They're doctors, lawyers, engineers. They can create a lot of mischief, and they have created a lot of mischief. they've convinced 75% of the American people that there's a conspiracy.
The problem with that, though, Mr. Bugliosi, and I have to break on this, okay? It happened in 1963, 44 years ago. You almost have to be 54 to remember the impact, and I'm 60. Obviously, I have more of an impact, more understood. Plus, I've been doing radio shows on it down through the years. But the average 40-year-old, he saw an Oliver Stone movie and took some piece of that years later, or saw a headline, and we both know that nobody wants to believe that one dumb so-and-so was able to bump off the most powerful man in the world.
Yeah, are you about to take a break now? Or
I'm about to take a break, yes, sir.
Oh, okay, when we come back, let's talk about that.
You got it. Vincent Bugliosi, Reclaiming History, the Assassination of President John F. Kennedy. Vincent Bugliosi, the author of Helter Skelter. Book is published by Norton, AM News Talk 1360. Back with Vincent Bugliosi, Reclaiming History, the Assassination of President John F. Kennedy. And, of course, Mr. Bugliosi also wrote Helter Skelter. The book is published by Norton. Well, I'll go back to what I was saying. This is a country where everything has to have a meaning. Everything has to happen for some bigger, larger reason. Nobody wants to believe that one dumb schnook was able to get off some shots and kill the most powerful man in the world. Stuff happens.
Yeah, there was an instinctive desire, I think, in this case to believe that powerful forces killed Kennedy because he was taking the country in a direction antithetical to their interests. And in a strange sort of way, the belief that powerful forces killed Kennedy as opposed to some lone nut with a deranged mind, in a strange way, it gives more meaning to his, to use your term, I think you used it, gives more meaning to his life and to his death. I mean, even Jackie herself said that we couldn't even have the satisfaction of his being killed for some cause like civil rights. He had to be killed by some silly little communist, and it robbed the president's death of meaning. Also, Doug, I think people find it, and again, this is visceral and instinctive, it's not logical, they find it intellectually incongruous that someone whom they perceive to be a king, i.e. Kennedy, could be struck down by someone they perceive to be a nonentity. I mean, here was Kennedy, who was captivating a world audience by his wit and charm and intelligence, and there was this youthful vigor, and he was a very attractive man and a beautiful wife, and they're driving down the street, a bright sunny day, he's waving to the crowd, he's smiling, and a second later, it's all over with, and people just instinctively said, this can't be, there's got to be more involved here. Of course, bullets are very democratic, and they kill or injure whomever they hit, and it doesn't take someone important to pull the trigger.
Yeah, and I want to go back to the bullets. I'm working my way back to that. I should also tell the audience that Mr. Bugliosi destroys David Lipton. I never could understand David Lipton's theory anyway, to be honest with you. I think Cyril said it was very Shakespearean.
Yeah. By the way, I respect Cyril, and I hope he's doing well.
Well, what I'd love to do is have you back on and talk to Cyril on our show, if you'd be amenable to that.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll have Greg talk to you upon conclusion of our interview.
Okay.
Because Cyril has high regard for you, and apparently you guys were back and forth on this book.
Well, where Cyril and I met for the first time was in London.
On the trial, yeah. I can remember you saying, and let Cyril have his fun. I still remember you saying that. Do you remember that?
Yeah, I think so. But where we had our biggest confrontation, of course, was on the so-called magic bullet. And I don't know if you want to get into that.
Let's go to the magic bullet, and a term that is now a part of the language, or a word, I should say, that I never heard before 1963. Yeah. That term, or that word, I should say, being pristine. This bullet was not pristine.
No, pristine, I guess, means perfect. And what they do in their books, they show the bullet from the side, and in my book, as you know, in the photo section, it shows the base of the bullet. The base of the bullet was badly damaged, so it was not pristine. The original weight of the bullet was 161 grains. It now weighs 158.6, so it's lost 2.4 grains. Also, this bullet, Doug, was a heavily metal-jacketed military-type bullet, the precise type of bullet designed to cause a lot of damage to objects it hits without causing too much deformation to itself. The other aspect of the magic bullet is that these conspiracy theorists, what they do in their books, they place Connally in the presidential limousine directly in front of Kennedy. And, of course, Connally was not seated directly in front of Kennedy. And then they argue that a bullet coming from the right to the left, passing through Kennedy on a straight line, soft tissue, after it exited Kennedy's throat, to hit Connally, it would have to make a right turn in midair and then a left turn. to go on to hit Connally. Of course, if you start out with an erroneous premise, everything that follows makes a heck of a lot of sense. The only problem is that it's wrong. And here we know from photographs and from the Zapruder film that Connally was not seated directly in front of Kennedy, and I show a photo in the book of that, Doug, because you've seen the photo section. He was seated to Kennedy's left front, a half a foot in, on a jump seat. So the orientation of Connally's body vis-a-vis Kennedy's was such that a bullet passing through soft tissue on a straight line through Kennedy had nowhere else to go but to go on and to hit Governor Connally. Now, in London, Spence asked Dr. Weck to describe the bullet, and I think Dr. Weck called it a magic bullet, or Spence did, and Dr. Weck said, Mr. Spence, bullets don't even do things like this in cartoons. Now, on cross-examination of Dr. Weck, I said to him, now, Dr. Weck, you concede that the bullet traveled on a straight line through Kennedy's body, and he acknowledged that, through soft tissue. I said, if it did not go on to hit Governor Connally, as you claim it did not, how come it didn't tear up the interior of the limousine or hit the driver or hit anyone else? And he said, I don't know, Mr. Bugliosi, I'm not responsible for the investigation. I didn't conduct the investigation. So I said, well, Dr. Weck, it sounds now like you have your own magic bullet, because I said, if it didn't hit Governor Connally, didn't tear up the interior of the limousine, didn't hit the driver or anyone else, I said it must have zigzagged to the left. And Dr. Weck said, no, it need not have zigzagged to the left. I said, did it hop, skip, and jump over the car? He said, no, it need not have performed any remarkable feat like that. Then I said, Dr. Weck, what happened to that bullet if it didn't hit Connally after it exited the governor's throat? And Dr. Weck said, I don't know. So what we really have here now, Doug, if you stop to think about it, we have a bullet exiting the president's throat, and if we're to believe the conspiracy theorists, this bullet literally vanished without a trace into thin air. That, I say, is a magic bullet. And yet the conspiracy theorists have wrapped the magic bullet argument around the neck of the Warren Commission for close to 44 years, and virtually everyone feels that the Warren Commission had a magic bullet. But the only people that have a magic bullet in this case are the conspiracy theorists.
Let's go back to the House Select Committee for just a second. Dr. Weck was one of the forensic pathologists involved, and I believe how many were there altogether? 6, 7, 8? Honest to God,
there were 9, and Dr. Weck was usually in the minority. But Dr. Weck is a well-respected pathologist. The chief pathologist on the House Select Committee was Dr. Bodden, and Dr. Bodden respects Dr. Weck very, very much. So when Weck speaks, you don't just disregard him like you disregard the typical conspiracy theorist, because he's not only a pathologist with an enormous amount of experience, but he's also a lawyer.
Mm-hmm. But the point I was going for was that Cyril was essentially the lone wolf of those forensic pathologists who were on the Select Committee. Mr. Bugliosi attacks conspiracy theories that I had never heard of in this book, Reclaiming History, the Assassination of President John F. Kennedy. Scott McClellan's father, LBJ, did not do it. What still bugs me is they still show that damn Corsican gunman thing on A&E every now and then, and that thing, you tore that thing to shreds.
Well, it's so bad. It first showed in England, and it's so bad that it's been barred from ever being shown again in England. So they
still show it here. That's what bugs me.
They export it to the United States. It's shown over and over and over again. The French government determined that these 3 Corsican hitmen who, according to these conspiracy theorists, killed the president. 2 of them were in prison at the time in France, and the other one was out on a ship somewhere. So it's just all pure nonsense, and yet millions of Americans have seen, the men from Marseille who apparently killed the president. It's all moonshine.
You also go on in the book, I'd like you to elaborate on this a bit, the Grassy knoll, among other things, I think this is a direct quote from the book, because you said essentially it was a lousy place to shoot from.
Well, it was lousy for all types of reasons. For one, the presidential limousine and the other limousines follow. All the people were looking to the front, and if you're a sniper, and forget about Oswald for a moment, whoever killed the president was a sniper. He wasn't like this fellow who tried to kill President Reagan, Hinckley, who did it, in the wide open, and he knew he'd be apprehended. He was a sniper. Snipers don't like to get caught. Now, if you're a sniper, why would you position yourself to the front when everyone's eyes are looking to the front and you're within the range of vision of everyone looking to the front? You wouldn't do that. What you would do is you'd wait till the president passed and then pick him off from behind, which is exactly what Oswald did. Also, from the 6th floor window, the presidential limousine was almost on a straight line with the barrel of a rifle. The limousine was only going 11.5 miles per hour. There's a 3.9-degree declination to Elm Street, which the relevance of that is that it eliminates the necessity of elevating the muzzle as the limousine gets farther away from the window. And I asked my firearms guy in London, he's from Wisconsin, said, was the president essentially a stationary target? And he said, yes, the president essentially was a stationary target on a straight line. From the grassy knoll, the president would not have a stationary target. He'd be moving from left to right. It'd be more difficult. Also, if a shot came from the grassy knoll, then there would have to have been an entrance wound to the right side of the president's body. There was no entrance wound to the right side of the president's body. The president was shot twice, and 17 pathologists, including the 3 surgeons who conducted the autopsy, all agree from visual seeing the wounds, I'm referring to the autopsy surgeons, to the 14 others who saw x-rays and photographs of these wounds, the president was shot twice, both in the backside. One, the upper right back, that's the one that exited the front of the throat. The other one, the upper right part of his head, and it exited in the right front of his head. So if a shot came from the grassy knoll, there would have had to have been 1 or 2 entrance wounds to the right side of the president. There were none. There was only the exit wound. Number 2, that bullet is traveling at 2,000 feet a second. It weighs 1/3 of an ounce. The head shot from the grassy knoll would have been about 35 yards. You know, Doug, that bullet would have passed right through the president's head. At an absolute minimum, it would have gone into the left hemisphere of the president's brain. It's 1/3 of an ounce. It's pretty heavy, traveling 2,000 feet a second, only 35 yards away, and yet the autopsy report said that the left hemisphere of the president's brain was, quote, intact, unquote. No shot came from the grassy knoll. No one saw any riflemen on the grassy knoll. No weapon, no expended cartridges from a weapon were found there. It didn't happen. It's a creation of the conspiracy theorists.
All right, let's cut to the gun and the Oswald, the Maliker Concerto. How good a gun, how bad a gun, and then people talk about the faulty sight. And my theory is always pretty much the same as, I guess it was Spectre. The guy threw the gun down and the sight got botched up.
Yeah, well, we do know it was the murder weapon, so it was good enough to get the job done. It was undoubtedly not the best gun in the world, and if you were from the CIA or the mob and you wanted to get the job done, you would not have your hitman use a $12 rifle. However, that $12 rifle was considered to be, by the United States Army, a fairly good rifle, almost the equivalent of the M1, which is the U.S. Military rifle at the time. The Carcano was the rifle used by the Italian Army. In test shots, the U.S. Army found out that they could fire up to 500 rounds without a misfire. So it was not that bad a rifle. People have said, well, how could he do this when he was not a great shot? And in fact, the conspiracy theorists claim he couldn't hit the broadside of a barn. That's a lie. He wasn't an expert shot, but he fired a .212 in the military. He was a sharpshooter, but he was not an expert shot. Also, how good was he that particular day? We have to assume he's aiming at the head, right? That's the most vulnerable part of the body. First shot misses completely. The second shot, assuming he's aiming at the head, enters the upper right back, meaning he missed the head. And the third shot hits the target. 1 out of 3 is not that great.
Now, let me jump in with a quick question. I've never fired a gun in my life, okay? But this sight business, how relevant or irrelevant is that?
Well, the sight business, we don't believe he used, when I say we, I'm not an expert on firearms, it is not believed by the House Select Committee that he used the telescopic sight. They believe he used the iron sight. Now, the relevance of that is that with the iron sight, he could fire 2 rounds within 1.66 seconds. With the telescopic sight, the minimum amount of time required to fire 2 rounds would be 2.3 seconds. And the relevance of all this is whether he could get off 2 shots in the time that he had. And whether he used the telescopic sight or the iron sight, he had enough time to get 2 shots out in the necessary time. But no one knows whether he used the iron sight or the telescopic sight. The belief is the iron sight because you can fire more quickly with the iron sight, and the range was not far away. The first shot that hit the president was about 58 yards, 59 yards. The second shot, about 88 yards. That's not that far away. On the range, when you fire for record, it's 100 yards, 2, 3, and 500 yards.
Now, you said in the book, and again, Vincent Bugliosi, Reclaiming History, the assassination of President John F. Kennedy, AM News Talk 1360 at 11 to go before 5. You said in the book that you could convict Oswald sans the Zapruder film, and I very much agree with you. In fact, I think if Oswald had lived, the jury probably would have taken an hour and a half to convict him. But let's talk about the Zapruder film, the first shot. There's always been this controversy. When was the first shot fired, etc.?
No one knows exactly, but from the testimony of witnesses, they said they heard a shot. Some thought it was a firecracker or a tire exploding. They heard the shot just as the presidential limousine had completed its turn from Houston onto Elm. And in the Zapruder film, that would make it somewhere around frame 160. Now, the second shot, that's the single bullet shot. Again, no one knows exactly when that was fired. You've got to realize there's no audio on the Zapruder film, but it probably was fired somewhere around 210 to 222. Why do I say that? Well, there was an oak tree which obstructed the view of Oswald up to about frame 207 or 208. So chances are he would not have fired around through the oak tree because he couldn't see Kennedy. So he fired it somewhere around 208, 209, 210. The strange thing is that, not strange thing, but the interesting thing is that the Zapruder film, there was a Stemmons Freeway sign there, and from around frame 207 to 222, the Zapruder film is blanked out, not blanked out, but there's only a Stemmons Freeway sign. But at 207 is the very time when the presidential limousine is starting to become completely clear from where Oswald was. Now, what happened behind the Stemmons Freeway sign in the Zapruder film? The president and Connally were shot at some point behind the Stemmons Freeway sign. Why do I say that? Because Connally emerges from behind the Stemmons Freeway sign at frame 222, and according to the House Select Committee, he was already showing reacting to a severe external stimulus. The upper torso of his body was starting to tighten up. Kennedy is not shown emerging from behind the Stemmons Freeway sign until frame 225, which is about, 1/6 of a second later. And he, even more clearly than Connally, is responding to a severe external stimulus. So they both were hit by the same bullet somewhere between 207 or 208 and 222. The third shot, there's no question about, that's the head shot at frame 313. That gets into a very, very important point here. And that's the head snap to the rear. Do we have time to talk about that?
Please, go ahead.
Okay. Millions of Americans saw the Zapruder film for the first time in 1975. It was a Geraldo Rivera special on ABC. I think it was Good Night America. And it convinced, and understandably so, millions of Americans that there had to be a conspiracy in this case. Why? Because if you look at the Zapruder film, at the time of the headshot, the president's head is snapped back to the rear 8 inches, indicating what? Well, indicating a shot from the front, which is where the grassy knoll is, not a shot from the rear where Oswald was alleged to be by the authorities. So people said there had to be a shot coming from the grassy knoll. Now, in London, Spence showed that segment of the Zapruder film 5 times. I didn't object. He said it looked like Babe Ruth had struck the president from the front with his bat. And he says, Mr. Bugliosi is trying to convince you folks that what you saw in this film with your very own eyes never even happened. And if I never had an answer to that, Doug, the verdict in London would have been almost assuredly not guilty, because that would have created a reasonable doubt of guilt. But here's the answer. And it's in the photo section of the book. I think you know what I'm going to say.
Right.
I don't think there's any other book on the assassination that's ever had frames 312 and 313 next to each other. I think this is the first time. At frame 312 of the Zapruder film, the president's head is okay. At frame 313, 1/18th of a second later, there was 18.3 frames per second. The president is shot in the head. You see the explosion to his head at frame 313. And Doug, in what direction is the president's head pushed at frame 313? Backwards or forwards? It's pushed slightly forward, 2.3 inches, indicating what? A shot from the rear. So at this all-important moment, you can't see it on the film. You have to look at the individual frames. And I showed these frames to the jury on a screen in London. At the all-important moment of impact, the president's head is pushed slightly forward, indicating a shot from the rear, and then at frames 314 to 321, you see the head snap to the rear caused by what the House Select Committee said was a neuromuscular reaction. Nerve damage to the president's brain caused by the bullet caused his back muscles to tighten, which in turn caused his head to snap to the rear. But that was an extremely important issue in London, and if I didn't have the answer to it, the verdict would have been not guilty. Incidentally, also in the book and in London, but the Warren Commission never had a high contrast photo of 313. But in the book, and I showed the jury in London, the high contrast photo of 313 shows this terrible spray of brain and blood matter, and as you know, Doug, it's all to the front, indicating a shot from the rear where Oswald was.
What are we talking in terms of time? Is it you're saying 3 shots in about, what, 8.4 seconds?
8.4 seconds, and the conspiracy theorists said that Oswald had 5.6 seconds, but he didn't. At 18
and by the way, the Warren Commission always said that was the minimum. They always said at a minimum, didn't they, have 5.6? Not that it was 5.6.
Right.
Okay.
Because no one knows exactly when the first shot was fired. And also, stop to think about this. In addition to 160 to 313 being 8.4 seconds, Doug, doesn't the clock start to run from the first shot? Because from the first shot, the cartridge is already in the chamber. The shooter, Oswald, whoever it was, and of course it was Oswald, had time to prepare for it. So really the clock starts running from the first shot. So in a way, you could say that he had 8.4 seconds to fire 2 shots. Because all he had to do for the first shot is he didn't have to pull the bolt to the rear or aim. He already had done that. All he had to do was pull the trigger.
You researched this book for how many years, sir?
I've been working on this book for over 20 years. You know, I've done other stuff in the meantime, but the last 8, 9 years, round the clock, almost 7 days a week, 80, 90, 100 hours a week. You know, the Warren Commission had 7 commissioners. They had 15 assistant consuls. They had a staff of lawyers. I bit off more than I could chew here. I finally succeeded, but I sense that it may have taken a toll on me, and I've always been impervious to the depredations of work. I mean, I used to try murder cases down at the DA's office, 1, 2, 3 month murder cases. Wouldn't bother me a bit. Other lawyers would try a drunk driving case. They'd have to go to Palm Springs to recuperate because of the stress. Nothing ever bothered me, but the Kennedy case, there's no bottom to the pile. You know, I have no computer. I have no secretary. I'm working on my home now. And I may have bitten off more than I can chew. I just have the sense that it may have taken a physical toll on me. It was just, it's just too much for one person.
Exit question, in all of the research that you did, what was the biggest surprise as during the course of oh my gosh, that sort of a moment?
I would say it was something that I had been told at some point, but it never really hit me the way it did later on when I got into the relationship between Marina and her husband. It was very tempestuous, as you know, and they were fighting. He'd beat her up. She'd run away. He'd get down on his knees, beg her to come back. She'd come back, and the cycle would continue. But there was another part of the relationship. Neither one of them could give the other what they knew the other needed. Are you there, Doug?
Yes, I'm listening.
Okay. The night before the assassination, Oswald goes out to Irving, Texas, to get his rifle to kill Kennedy the following day. So he intended to kill Kennedy, but I'm convinced that it was conditional because Marina has testified, and at the time of the trial in London, I didn't get into all of these issues, and I really learned a lot more about this later. She begged him, or he begged her 3 times to come back to him. He said, I got a job now. I can get an apartment big enough for you and the children, and he said, I'll get you that used washing machine that you need. They were very, very poor. And she told the Warren Commission, she said, I was smiling on the inside. She said, but I was tough with him on the outside. And after the 3rd time, his demeanor changed completely, and he was very distant. That night in bed, when her leg touched his leg, he pushed it aside. We know what he did the following day. And I really believe, I'm 99% sure, that if Marina had come back to Oswald that night, he would not have killed Kennedy the next day. Marina herself has taken on responsibility for the president's murder. I didn't know about it at the time because I didn't see it, but I saw later a letter that she wrote to the Warren Commission in Russian, translated into English, which she said, if I would have only known what he was thinking about doing the following day, obviously I would have come back to him, and very clearly she said, almost assuredly, the murder would not have taken place the next day. I find it very hard to believe that after he's begging her to come back, he's going to get her a used washing machine, an apartment in Dallas, that he would go out the next day and kill the president. So it was a conditional type of thing.
Amazing. Reclaiming History, the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. The author of Helter Skelter, Vincent Bugliosi, has been the guest. The book is published by Norton. It is an amazing book, sir. My congratulations to you. And I'm going to put you on hold. My producer would like to get the name of his secretary. Maybe we can coordinate something and have you and Cyril on the program together, if that'll be okay with you.
Great.
All right. Thank you so much, Mr. Bugliosi. Don't go
Thank
away
you,
now.
Doug. I really appreciate this.
All right, sir. Don't go away. And, Greg, I'm going to put him on hold, and you can talk to him and get a number. We can coordinate with Bugliosi's office and Dr. Weck's office, and we'll be back in 5 on AM News Talk 1360.